Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's Capture One Pro 10 webinar, our third actual Capture One Pro 10 webinar now. And today we are looking at the tangent element system, a really exciting development for Capture One 10, which you're going to learn a lot about today. And it's really exciting. It's the first of its kind to be used on still imaging application as opposed to its traditional use of being used in things like color grading software, video editing software, and so on. More on that in a second. If you don't know who you're listening to, my name's David. I'm part of the software sales team based out of Copenhagen in Denmark. And today's webinar, as usual, is 60 minutes long. You're very welcome and encouraged to ask questions throughout. If you're listening on your Mac or PC, at the bottom of your GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see a section called questions. Put a question in there and that will come straight through to me. If you're on your Android device or iOS device, you'll see a question mark icon at the bottom and tap that and you can ask a question too. There's my colleague James lurking in the background as well. He'll probably try and answer some questions on text too. If you could keep your questions on today's topic, that would be great. It just helps myself and James and actually everybody listening as well. The webinar is being recorded, so don't feel you have to remember everything. You can always refer back to it on our YouTube channel. You'll get a follow-up email in roughly 24 hours time, and that will have the link in there to the email itself, or sorry, to the recording itself. So let's begin. Just give me a couple of seconds to move a few panels around and things like that. And we should be able to get started. I've also got gonna run the webcam in a minute, Skycam, so you can see exactly what I'm using. I think that will just give you a helpful context into how it's working with Capture One. Before we do that, just so you know what we're going to be looking at today. 1 second. Let's just move that over there. Tangent, just so you know, is a company based out of the UK. They make a number of different hardware panels. You can see their website here, tangentwave.co.uk. The one that I have sitting on my desk, which you'll see in a minute, is called the Element. So that's made up of one, two, three, four panels. Almost couldn't count them. Four panels then, which can either be used individually or together as a complete set. There's also the ripple panel, which I'll discuss a little bit later. There's the wave panel, which is a all-in-one system, just a single deck like so. And there's also the VS, which is a virtual system, which you can run on your iPad over Wi-Fi connection. And that's a good kind of way just to try it out to get your head around exactly what's capable with these systems. But today, as I said, I'm using the Element system. So let's just get Capture One up and Mapper up, which we're talking about in a minute. Going to start my webcam, so let's make sure that's looking good. Okay, let's bring that over here so you can see, or you should be able to see on my desk, the tidiest it's ever been, to be honest. So you can see I've got three of the panels. You can see there. There's also, if I just lean out and pull this one in for a second, I run out of space on my desk. But we also have this panel, which is the TK Trackable Panel. But we'll come back to that in a second. So the first thing I'll do, I'll just explain what each of the panels can do and how they're named and how they're set up. So some common ground between all of them. They're all just a basic USB connection into the back, nothing more fancy than that. I've got them plugged under the desk, which you can't see. Basically, a USB hub, very standard basic USB hub, nothing fancy. Powered hub, which just connects up all the panels. As you can see, they're individual units, but you can also, with the help of some magnets which come with them, you can actually snap them together as well, so they can sit into one long panel as such. Now, the way I've set it up today is a compromise between you guys being able to see it and also ergonomically. But I'll discuss kind of good setups as we go through it as well. So the four panels that we have in the element range is BT for buttons. So that's just simple push buttons. There's KB for knob, which is rotary dials with a push click as well. The one on my left here is the MF for multifunction panel, excuse me. So that has a trackable, a rotary dial, and also an arrangement of buttons on the left-hand side. And then the last one, which you saw briefly, was this one, which is the TK, the trackable panel, like so, which has a very specific use just for the color balance tool. But we'll plug that in and have a look at that later. It's a first world problem that my desk isn't big enough, of course. Okay, so let's go through each individual panel and talk about what they do. By the way, we're getting to Tangent Mapper a bit later. This is the setup application that you can download from Tangent. We ship, or rather Capture One 10 ships with a default map, which is the one that I'm going to look at first of all, so you know exactly how the default works. And then we get into the amazing mapper where you can really kind of stretch the limits of what's possible. So if we just pop into Capture One, let's start with this one, the button panel. You'll also notice that on the top of each panel, just point to that, there's a really nice clear LCD display, which I know it's hard for you to see just on a webcam, but if I just angle that up to the webcam, it basically names on each of the grids exactly what each function does. So if you forget, then it's very easy just to have a quick glance at the panel and know what it does. Because the wonderful thing about this system, of course, is that even if you don't have tools showing on Capture One, you don't have a browser showing on Capture One, you can still access all the functions. It's not dependent on any keyboard shortcuts you have set in Capture One. It's a complete, if you like, straight connection into Capture One without the need for accessing shortcuts or anything like that. So regardless of what shortcuts we have set on Capture One, it makes no difference to Tangent. It can be completely independent of that. So first one, button panel. These are basically shortcuts. And you might think, well, what's the point of having a panel of buttons when I have a keyboard? So mostly on a keyboard, you're having to drive shortcuts with modifier keys like command something, control something, shift something, whereas this is just a really nice kind of direct interface into accessing things. So we have 12 buttons here, for example, and they do simple things like, if I just turn on exposure warnings, let's just mess up the exposure for a second. So turning on exposure warnings, for example, like so, turning a grid on and off, turning a focus mask on and off, like so. So basic, simple action buttons to turn things on and off, like so. And the way we have set it up on the default, if we just go to the mapper button panel, we have exposure warning, focus mask grid, proofing mode, a new function in Capture One. Turning labels on and off, that's the labels you can see on the bottom of the screen like so. Hiding the toolbar, for example, and bringing that back, and then hiding the tools, hiding the viewer, and hiding the browser. So basic, simple functionality like that. Now the great thing is that at the bottom you'll see, if I indicate this button here, you can see on the webcam is labeled B. This button here is labeled A. So this is the alternate button and the bank button, as it's known. So B for bank basically means that you can cycle through additional banks. So even though there's 12 buttons here, if we just look on the mapper, you can see we can cycle to two different banks. So by tapping B, it would actually switch over to a secondary bank. Now on our default map, we've just given you one to play with, but there's nothing to stop you then multiplying what you have here for the 12 controls to then a second bank for a further 12 shortcuts. So you can imagine that you have, for each element panel, you have the different banks, so as different layers. And then on each of those banks, you have the A button, which is alternate, which is a click and hold toggle. So just bear that in mind because that has some useful features. So when I hold down A, it can give me then an alternate for each of those buttons. And you'll see why that's useful for some of the other panels. So for each layer or each bank, there's also an alternate which allows you to do more as well. So it's not just a basic 12 buttons or 12 dials or whatever. You have different banks with an alternate on each of those banks. So that gives you really good scope for placing lots of functionality. So that's buttons. Let's go to knobs, which is element KB. So you can probably imagine what this does. We have 12 dials here. Like all of the panels, beautifully constructed, very hard wearing, very solid, very nice feel and high quality equipment, of course, and the dials that they use have a really nice smooth feel to them. So you can imagine we've got exposure, contrast, brightness, saturation as it's laid out in Capture One. So just by tweaking the dials, you can see the slider up here moving as I adjust, of course. And then if I wish, I can tap to reset, and that takes me back to a 0. So we've laid them out pretty much as they are in the UI. And as I said, you don't have to have the tools visible for this to work. So this is, again, the great thing about it, that you could actually work completely full screen if you wanted to and still have access to all your adjustments. So we can play with the dials like so. So we've got saturation. If I just ramp that down, you can see that happening, of course. And remember, tap to take you back to 0. So on bank 1, remember we spoke about the different banks. Let's just bring that up. Bank 1, we have the exposure controls on the first column. Then we have structure and clarity and highlight and shadow controls. And then Kelvin and tint and vignetting and defringing, like so. Then we can go to second bank, which changes the mode, which gives us all the sharpening controls. I'll just click on the mapper so we can see it. So we have all the sharpening controls, noise reduction controls, and then, for example, moire control, and if you're applying film grain, so impact and grain on the sliders as well. Sorry, on the dials too. And then a final third bank gives us all the black and white controls. So if we go to black and white mode, so I've actually got a black and white shortcut on the multifunction panel. So if I tap that, that sets black and white for me, and then I can use, for example, black and white controls to then adjust my black and white like so. So this is labeled, I know you can't see it, but black and white, red, green, blue, yellow, cyan, magenta, and so on. So that gives me all the different black and white dials. Again, if we want to reset, we can just give it a light tap, and then we go back to 0. And then if I click the black and white enable again, that would take me back to color. So a nice toggle to get to black and white and back. So 3 banks, 1, 2, 3, and just it will keep cycling through those various different banks as I tap. So I can get back to exposure, contrast, and everything else. So then if I decide I want to dial in a bit more contrast, I can do so by tweaking the dial, lift the shadows, for example, like so. So it's super simple to use, and again, we don't have those tools up. Can you adjust the knobs simultaneously, Paul asked. Great. Yes, and again, that's the whole benefit of this, especially when you're color grading with the Trackables. Then if you're in, a standard UI, of course, with a mouse and a pointer, we can only do one slider at a time. Whereas if you wanted to manipulate both sliders, let's just go to my black and white, for example. If I wanted to do my blues and greens at the same time, then we could darken the blues and raise up the greens at the same time. So if I bring up the black and white panel for you, just so you can see I'm not cheating, if I just tweak 2 dials at the same time, you can see them moderating like so. So yes, it's totally possible. Oh, that looks a little bit dark, eh? So yeah, any combination of any adjustment can all be done at the same time. Remember, we're not relying on shortcuts, so it's not like when you turn a dial, it's tapping a key very quickly. It's straight into the interface of Capture One. So we've removed that layer that relies on mouse input and shortcut key input to go directly into the brains of Capture One, if you like. So that's the dial panel, 3 banks, again with an alternate as well. That will become clear when we look at that in a minute. So the next one, this is my favorite panel actually, because you can do so much with this. This is the multifunction panel. So it has a bunch of buttons on it like we saw before, has some slightly different ones at the bottom. And if you think where this was born for video editing, we've got a stop button, a forward and back, and then best way to describe that, like fast forward or rewind button. But this has a really good use for Capture One. And then we have a trackable, of course, which you can probably guess what's that good for, which is for local adjustments and a really nice use for the overlay. So I'm going to switch to a session in a second, but before we do that, let's just have a look at what's possible with local adjustments. Yeah, let's do that, and then I'll show you a little bit later how I made a different map to exercise local adjustments before. So on this panel, let's just go back to the mapper, and then we've got the multifunction. You can see the way the mapper split up. We've got the buttons on the left-hand side, so control of all the buttons here, and then we've got the trackable bank on the right-hand side. And don't worry, we'll get to all the sort of clever stuff that we can do in the mapper today as well. So for something like local adjustments, if I just switch to my brush for a second, on the trackable, if we spin that down like so, then we can get a softer brush. If we spin it right and left, then we can change the size, which is really nice. So if I then wanted to just do a quick mask on my chilies here, for example, I could. Then if I wanted to make it smaller, just to mask out my pepper pot, and then smaller still, just to do a quick mask like so, then I can very easily do so as well. And on the shortcut side of it here, we've got some shortcuts for fill mask, invert mask, and so on. So if I just get rid of that, let's just draw a quick mask like so. So if I wanted to fill the mask, I can just tap that fills it in. If I'm masking over here, tap that, fills my mask. Then I've got invert mask like so to invert to. So it's really speedy to do all that kind of local adjustment stuff. I can also tap this to add a layer. So that's added a second local adjustment layer if I needed to do more local adjustments. I can also use these buttons here to move up and down through my layers. So I don't need the keyboard at all. I can pretty much do everything from this panel. The outer ring does my opacity. So if I spin the ring this way, there's actually on the LCD panel here, it's actually telling me the opacity and percentage. So I don't actually have to bring that up in Capture One. So I know if I want low opacity, then I can drop down to 30%, for example, or if I want to spin and go up to a high opacity, I can do so and then go back and then a low opacity. Now remember we spoke about the alternate function, because as well as having, if I just bring up the panel size, hardness, and opacity, we also have flow. Now we only have one ring, of course, to make an adjustment like that. So how would we then get to flow, which is where alternate comes into play. So if I just hold down the alternate button, then I can spin the wheel, and then that becomes flow. So now I can adjust flow. If I let go of alternate, then I'm opacity. If I hold alternate, then I'm doing flow. So again, alternate, because I don't need to change banks. I don't need to change like the whole action of that trackable side. I just need to quickly access something like flow. So really nice for local adjustments. As I said, spin it to get a different size. I can get full opacity by rotating, and then I can get full flow by doing the alt and rotate. There's 2 buttons at the top, which is super handy as well because they're resets. So if I go tap, tap, that takes me back to known resets for size, hardness, and opacity. And size-wise, regardless of your zoom level, it'll give you a brush size which you can actually locate. It's not so enormous that it sort of disappears off the screen. So tap, tap takes you back to 0. Really, really nice. Before we go onto this side, I'll just answer a couple of questions which the rest of you might be interested in. Can you customize the amount of change for each move in a knob? Yes. When we look at the mapper, you can change the ramp rate from like coarse to fine, or you can have a global setting for all of them and change individual ones as well. It's super powerful. Does it make sense to start with just one panel like the multifunction? Yes, I don't think you have to go out and buy the whole kit straight away. If you want to, that's great. But I think a really nice starter pack is definitely the multifunction, because you'll see all the other awesome stuff it can do in a second, and the knob panel together. This one is great because it gives you those fast access, but you could get by with a keyboard, and you've also got buttons here as well. But these two together are really fantastic. Could you have two knob panels? Jean-Pierre is asking. No, the software only supports one. But don't forget, you've got 3 banks on there. So you've got 12, 24, 36 dials, and the alternate as well. So actually, you've got 72 possibilities on one panel. So I don't think you really need to have probably 2 knob panels. So easy to flick through. See, now I'm on exposure for adjustment, tap, tap. Then I'm on black and white, and now I'm back to exposure again, sharpening. And it changes very quickly. There's no delay or lag or anything like that. Okay, so now this side, the button side and the buttons underneath, this is super exciting. So I'm just gonna, let's just go to a slightly different set of images just to give you an idea of how this works better. So we've got Capture One session here. We've got 5 different looks, 5 different outfits, for example, just in your sort of typical fashion e-commerce shoot. So how will we go about sort of rating and so forth these images? So if you remember just a second ago, I said we had some sort of play and stop buttons, if you like, that would come from the video editing industry, but they are just as good for working with still images. So to give you an example, if I press right and left, then of course we cycle through the images like so. So as I tap, then we just go back and forth through the images. The stop button, which is on my middle finger, I can tap that and it tags the image green. So you can think of this as a way to run through images like so, and then select. So blasting through like that, very simple. Now remember about alternate again. If I made a mistake and I want to clear that tag, if I do alternate stop, then it clears the tag like so. So very simple. So if we decide actually that's not a green tag, let's do alt stop, and then that takes that green tag away, for example. So very nice to be able to go through and do something simple like that. Again with alternate, if I hold alternate and do the right arrow, that takes me to the last image. If I do alternate and the left arrow, that takes me to the first image as well. We can also use this quite nicely when working with sets. If you don't know what a Capture One set is, if I select, say, more than, let's just go to all images so we have lots of images to choose from. Again, alternate to the first set like so. I don't want to select all of them. So if I select 4 images, this is us working in a Capture One set. Let's just turn off my margin for a second. There we go. So once we select more than one image, so 2 and above, this is a Capture One set. And the 2 buttons here, this is the arrow with the straight line on it. This takes me to the next set. So if I go tap, then I get to the next 4 images, and the next 4 images, and the next 4 images, and the previous 4 images, and so on. So once I'm in a set of images like this, I can go back and use the right and left cursor keys to go through each image and then apply like a star rating or a color grade. Let's just do 2 in a set so we can actually see my color grade. We can hide the tools, we don't need those. So next set, next set, next set. Then if, for example, I wanted to pick one of these, then I can use the right and left like so, and then use the central stop button to tag that with my green tag. However, if I do that now, you see it's going to tag both images, which we don't want to do. So let's just clear that. And if you didn't know, this icon up here on the toolbar, this means edit the primary or edit the entire selection. So if Fortunately, James, who built this map, placed a shortcut button here to turn this toggle on and off. So if I tap that, that turns the toggle off. Now I can just do this one, move to the next set, pick the one I want. Let's have both. Next set. Let's have this one. Next set, and so on. So we can blast through sets really quickly for doing selections. Now moving on from that, on the buttons up here, if I just bring up the mapper for a second, you can see here on the button bank 1 that as well as being able to tag green, if you wanted to, we've got red, yellow, green tags there. So for example, if I wanted to make this one red, I could just tap this button and you see and it marks that red down here at the bottom. So you're not restricted to just green tag, of course. And the nice thing is if we want to say select all my greens, I can tap this one. So if I tap this button, that's selected all my green images like so, just with one click. And then moving on from that once more, if I tap this button, it will then create me an album from that selection. So that's a really super speedy way to just show you a very basic culling sort of system like that, either using a set or just going through the images, tagging with the color and so on. So as well as having select green, we've also got select yellow, which there isn't any, and we've also got select red, which was just that one that I had as well. So really super nice. There's also another shortcut button up here. Let's just go back to outfit 1, for example. In that we can go to next collection. So if you look in my session favorites, if I tap this button, that goes to my next collection, to my next, and so on. Remember alternate again. So if I press alternate, this then becomes previous collection, like so. So really simple to go through. So next, press alternate, previous collection, like so. Now, if I just hide my viewer for a second, also with alternate, we've got some other cool stuff on these buttons as well. So if you remember, I had alternate left to go to first image, alternate right to go to, sorry, which one was it? Can't remember which one it was now. Alternate left, alternate right. There we go. Alternate left, alternate right takes me to my first image and last image, which is really handy because sometimes when you move to a new collection, if there's nothing selected in that collection, then you can just simply press Alt first, and then that will take you to the first image. And then if I hide my browser once more, or bring my viewer back, sorry, then we can look at the first image and then we can go through, for example. It also means, if I just bring up the browser, if we have, let's say, a selection or a set like that, and we're just looking at some of those images, and then we want to just select the primary, that's the one listed here. If we look on the mapper, we can see on our alternate layer that we've got select primary variant, which is alternate right arrow. So in Capture One, if I do alternate right arrow, tap, then it just selects my primary like so. So really sort of nice additional stuff like that. And hopefully that gives you an idea of what's possible with alternate. So remember for alternate here, we could go next collection, alt previous collection. We could go first image and last image with alternate. And then we could deselect primary variant with alternate right. And if we had, say, a selection like this, and we just wanted to select the primary, for example, we could do alternate right, like so. So really clever stuff with alternate. Now, remember we had two banks. We sort of had our first bank that was just for local adjustments, and the second bank that was all about selecting, rating, color, tagging, and so on. Now, remember the Trackable also has its two banks as well. So right now we're on size, hardness, and opacity, but remember B is changing the bank on this side. So if I tap B, it's changing the operation of the bank on this side. But if I do alternate B, it changes the operation of the trackable into something else. So if any of you guys shoot tethered and you're using overlays, let's just get up overlay tool, this one. So if you're ever using overlays, you can also use the trackable in the outer ring to position and scale the overlay. So let me just grab overlay. It's not going to look anything like Rebecca on screen, but this is just a sketch overlay of it's actually a camera pouch, if you're wondering what on earth it is. And using the trackable, you see I can actually position the overlay on screen, and the outer one gives me my scale. So by dialing the outer ring, that gives me my scale, and then using the trackable, then we can position that wherever we like as well. And of course, we've got a shortcut key to turn the overlay on and off, like so. So I can just turn overlay on and off, toggle it with that too. So trackable, local adjustments, overlay scale and position, selecting, rating, culling, creating albums, using sets, moving through images in a really efficient way. So for whoever that was asked, that was Michael. You can hopefully see why this panel is very useful because it can do so many different things. Now the last one, which I ran out of space on my desk to connect, is this guy, which is the trackable panel, like so. I'm just going to, before I plug that in, let's just switch back to a different session, or catalog rather. So let's just bring up an image there. We might like to put a color grade on, for example. So it's hot pluggable. So if I just plug this into USB at the back, takes a couple of seconds to light itself up, like so. So now we're good. If I just go through to, let's just change this to the color tab and then the color balance tool, like so. So if you haven't used color balance in Capture One, then this is a great way to simply apply a creative color tint to your image to the shadows, midtones, and highlights. And traditionally, you would do that by picking out the dot in the middle and then just dragging that to the color tone that you wanted to have, like so. Double click to reset, and then on the right hand side, you would use the slider. So I'm operating trackpad left-handed to change the luminosity of that particular tone. Now the thing is, you can only do one at a time, but with trackables, you can do two at a time, or three at a time if you happen to have three hands. So I'm sure you can figure out how that works. We've got shadows, midtones, highlights. We have an outer ring and the trackable, of course, and then a number of buttons at the top. So basically, you just roll the ball in the direction that you want to go. So if I wanted to have cool shadows, for example, I could just roll the ball like so, whilst at the same time warming up the highlights and then warming up the midtones. Now the outer rings do luminosity. James in the background came up with a good thing to remind him which way to go what. So righty lighty to lighten up, and obviously left to the dark, so we can just spin like so. So if I want to just brighten my shadows, darken the midtones, that works really well, James, righty lighty. That's a good way to remember it. So we can apply our color grade like so, really nicely. And don't forget we have these buttons at the top as well. So what B does on the end, if I do hold down B, that gives me a preview. So I'm pressing and holding like so. So just to give me an idea of my color grade. And then also we have A alternate, which again, if you wanted to set these up to do something else, you could. There wouldn't actually be anything to stop you having a different map, if you like, and we'll come to that for using this for local adjustments, for example, or other stuff. Or you could set it to rotate an image if you wanted to jog. There's so many possibilities. But B will, of course, show you your grade. Two buttons at the top, like the two buttons on the multifunction panel. Tap the left-hand one to reset color, tap the right-hand one to reset luminosity, like so. So if I've made a grade, I can just tap, tap, tap to reset like so. Really nice panel. So if you do a lot of color grading work, then definitely that's going to save you a lot of time. Desmond said, great tool, but very expensive. I mean, cost is relative really to time. So if this is going to save you a lot of time in terms of image adjustment, selection, color grading, and so on, then really the cost is is kind of somewhat irrelevant in a way. Um, it's extremely high quality. I mean, this is very solid. It's all metal construction and so on. I mean, if you're interested in a color grading panel, if I did mention that they have other products, I'm just going to unplug this again, all hot pluggable. Put this over here. Nearly dropped it this morning, which was a frightening moment. If we go back to Safari and show you Ripple, this works exactly the same way as the panel you've just seen. So trackables, rotary dials, B button for preview, reset, alternate as well. This is, it's not a metal casing, it's a plastic casing, but the feel of the trackable and the rotary dials is just as good. So that's a good kind of lower price point option. If you want to buy any of the equipment, we'll talk about how to do that at the end of the session. So let's go back to Capture One. So that gives you a good idea of the possibilities of the default map and the default panels. But there's so much more you can do. So this is the super exciting stuff. So this is Tangent Mapper. So you can see it's split up into trackables, multifunction, knobs, buttons, and wave, which is that all-in-one panel, which we've also done a basic map for as well, if you chose to go with the wave system. So let's start with sort of some basic stuff that you might want to do. So let's say we've got Capture One Pro 10 default controls. This is what ships in Capture One, which is pretty much what you've seen so far. We've kept it relatively light and simple, but also extremely powerful to give you an idea what's possible. But if you want to go further, of course, you can do so as well. So if I want to make a new map, if I just say save as, then I can give this a different name. So I call this Capture 110 DGR webinar, for example, if I can spell webinar, and save that. And now this gives me a copy of the default map, which I can start to, mess with and customize, for example. So let's just do something really basic. Let's say we want to change the parameter of a button. Let's do buttons first of all. So you see the outline of the buttons here, and you can switch between button bank 1 and button bank 2, and whether you're on the standard, remember each bank has the standard and alternate. So standard would be the buttons as they are now. Alternate would be the click and hold if you're holding down alternate. So let's say on the standard set, I just want to make this button do something else, like let's just go in here. So once we click the button, this brings up the control mapping window, which basically shows you all the possibilities that we can do in Capture One. So let's do something like adjustment shortcut. So here we could say, oh no, it's under edit shortcuts. As you can see, I think the total is 460 different options. So let's grab, or is it file? I can never remember where it is. So edit, adjustment shortcuts, cool, so that makes sense. So copy adjustments, like so. So that now means that button is copy adjustments. And you see here the mapping applies to the current bank in the current mode, but you can also make it apply to all banks, so banks 1 and 2 if you wish. And you can also lock it to alternate mapping. So that means whether alternate is pressed or not, it's going to do the same thing, or you could have something different for alternate. So that could be copy adjustments. Let's go to this button, and then we go here, we say adjustment shortcuts, and we say apply adjustments, for example. So now I've got copy and apply. So back in Capture One, if we had, a series of images, let's just go up here, for example. So let's open up Alex. Let's just adjust. Let's take saturation down a bit. Drop contrast down, saturation a bit more, and so on. And then if we wanted to copy and apply that, that would be really simple. Let's just hide my viewer for a second. I could say copy adjustments with the new button that I just made. So it's this one here, copy adjustments, and then select whatever I want to. Let's just grab those images and then simply say apply adjustments, and it will send those across. So copy and apply. Let's just mess up that first one you see there, and then just say copy and apply once more, and then it brings it all across like so. So really simple, just to add, some kind of basic functionality like that. So if we go back to Mapper, that's just an example of what you could do with the buttons. Remember, you could go to Bank 2 and you could totally customize that as well. In terms of the knobs, again, you can just cycle through the different banks and just add any adjustments you want to do. Don't forget, for each bank, you have the alternate layer as well, which could also do something different. Jean-Pierre, who wanted 2 knob panels, I don't think you need to really. You can just do a good job of setting up the different knobs. But I think pretty much for the knob panel, we've set up everything that's possible. If you didn't have this panel and you only had the knob panel, there's nothing to actually stop you setting up one of them. If we go to, let's grab, trying to remember where it is. There's nothing to stop you, say, adjusting brush size, for example, because you could make it do a fake key press, which would be make brush smaller and larger, and so on and so forth. So you can kind of make it mimic shortcuts, but that's not, really the point of kind of working with the tangent. But if you didn't have this panel, then you could do something like that. But I think in terms of the knob panel, we've done a pretty good job of mapping everything possible. Now with multifunction, sky's the limit here, really. Again, the default map does a really nice job of showing you exactly what's possible. But I made a different map, which I'm going to load up in a second, and then just to show you what else we could do. Just a few questions on there. Could we use knobs to straighten the image? Sliders for rotating keystone are really the only things not supported in the first release. That's what James has answered in the background. Is there a way to use? Sorry, Nicholas is asking. I've seen the functions you can fix are different according to the type of buttons. Is there a way to use whatever functions for all buttons? No, certain functions are only specific to some buttons, of course. But again, if you want to make it do a fake key press, you could. But to be honest, I think with the functionality that's in the mapper, you probably don't need to do that. People were asking, does this work with other apps? Of course, yeah. Lots of apps are supported, DaVinci, Avid, SpeedGrade, and so on and so forth. But this is the first, if you like, raw converter which is supported. Could you adjust knobs for exposure when in thumbnail grid view without opening up a single image? Yes, I just did that actually. So, for example, I'm in grid view here, and then if let's just rotate exposure, and then you can see it's getting darker, like so. So yes, there's nothing to stop you working in grid view to adjust stuff as well. Could you adjust multiple images simultaneously? No, even if I have multiple images selected, the edit happens on the primary, but as you saw, that was really quick. Let's just say we adjust this. I'll drop saturation down so it's really obvious, for example. Then I could just say copy adjustments, apply adjustments, like so. So simple as that. The reason why it's not adjusting everything simultaneously, you can imagine that would be a pretty heavy CPU drain. Okay, I'll show you how to manage the different maps. Oh, one other thing that I didn't mention actually, going back to Jean-Pierre and his 2 panels. So don't forget you've got, say, various different banks with an alternate layer on each bank. If that's not enough, if we go to edit modes in the tangent mapper, we could add a different mode, whatever we want to call this. Actually, let's go to buttons. Let's say we say edit modes, and then we could call this like a tethered capture mode and say apply. And then this gives us a further tab, which we could then customize as well. And basically what you would need to do then is to set up a button. Let's go to button bank 2, for example. We would set up a button that then takes you to the next mode, like so. So basically now on my this bank here, if I tap this button, that will take me to tethered capture mode, like so. And then I'll be stuck in that mode because I need to make another button here that takes me back to next mode as well. So now this will then cycle back between different modes. So if you watch the LCD displays, because I haven't mapped anything on my tethered capture mode, see it all goes dark because there isn't anything mapped. And if I tap this again, it takes me back to my default mode, like so. So again, that gives you another layer that you can customize as well. So the likelihood of you running out of knobs, buttons, dials, trackables to put stuff is extremely unlikely. So that's a really nice ability just to add further tabs, and then that will give you another set of instructions that you can do. So I'm going to load up a different map. So if we go to Manage Control Maps, like so, you can actually see some of the supported apps there, but there is more. So this is a map that I made yesterday just playing around with. So I can simply choose that in the mapper and then say select. It's just warning me that I've made changes to that previous map, but I don't care about that right now, so I'll say don't save. And now it's loaded up my map, which I was playing around with yesterday, for example. So I just kind of played around with a few different things. Let's just let's switch to a different collection of images. Get up something a bit more interesting. So I did a few things in here that are different. So first of all, on the button bank, I've got a next tool tab. So I can cycle through the tool tabs like so if I wish. If I'm going to like local adjustments, for example, remember most of the time I don't really need to go through tool tabs because I've got everything here. But if I wanted to go to the color editor, for example, and then start using the color editor tool, then of course I need my mouse, etc., to pick colors and so on and so forth. So of course panels like this don't totally negate the need for some kind of pointing device, but they reduce it heavily. So that was a sort of a basic change like that, switching between tool tabs. For example, I put my black and white enable on this panel as well. Just because the way I set it out on my desk, then it makes it easy for me to then go to my black and white, for example. So if I enable black and white, then I can just go ahead and then start to tweak my black and white, go back to contrast and so on. So that was just a little basic change there. I made a second bank. If we just go back to Mapper, I'll put the second bank up here. I appreciate this is small, but on the recording you'll see this in 2K beauty. I just made an example that might be good for tethered capture, for example. So I've got a button at the top to capture an image. If I just tap it, I can open the live view window. I can close the live view window just by mimicking Command W to close it. I can bring up my focus mask if I wish, like so. So all stuff that's handy for tethered capture. Like you saw when we were looking at the session, if I wanted to go through my next collection, then I can do so and then pop up to my previous collection. I can put my grid on, I can turn my overlay on as we did once more as well, and hide the viewer, hide the browser, all that kind of stuff. So this was a nice little setup I did for tethered capture. I don't have a camera connected, so I can't necessarily show you. Actually, I could. Let's just open up Rebecca for a second. So let's say we're shooting outfit 1 and we're going to shoot outfit 2. I can go to my next collection like so. I set up a shortcut to set that collection as the capture collection. So now this means I'm going to be shooting into this folder, and then the last button I set up to reset my capture counter. So I can literally go next collection, set as capture, reset counter, get ready to shoot. So 3 clicks like that, I've changed my folder, set it as a capture collection, and reset the capture counter. So really nice example for tethered capture. And all that sort of stuff, it's really easy to set up in Mapper. You just have to find it. So next collection, for example, that's edit shortcut, go to next collection, previous collection, you can see all the sets there, setting color tags and so on. Remember, 460 different options. Reset the capture counter. Again, edit shortcut, we've got reset capture counter, reset naming counter, all that sort of stuff. And what else did I have? Capture, that's under camera shortcuts. We've got capture. Notice you could adjust your shutter speed, aperture, and ISO as well if you wanted to, and so on. So I thought that was a really kind of handy little bank for tether capture. Now what I did for the multifunction panel, let's just go back to the other one. So what I did for a multifunction panel, and again, this is all examples, like you can choose to ignore all of this or follow it. I made some changes to help with local adjustments. So if we go to the multifunction panel, change to my bank 2. So I've got add layer, add heal layer, add clone layer, draw mask, erase mask, gradient mask, show me the mask, invert mask, fill mask, and layer up and layer down. So pretty much do everything that I want to do for local adjustments. So just to give you an example, if we were going to do a local adjustment here, I can do everything from the panel now. I really don't need to do anything else. So first of all, I could add a layer like so. I can then choose my draw mask brush. I can then, whoops, I need to just get the size up. So now I can just use the trackable to mask what I want, for example. Then I could add another layer if I wanted to do some other masking, add another layer like so, go back down to my first layer if I wanted to check that. I can turn my mask on and off like so, very simple. If I'm doing let's just add another layer. If I'm doing something where, let's turn the mask on. If I'm doing something where I need to fill a mask, I can just say fill mask like so, and then invert mask 2, fill mask again, invert, and so on. The only thing I didn't have is delete layer, but that's pretty easy to click that anyway. If I do add heal layer, then it already creates me a heal layer like so. Add clone layer, adds me a clone layer. So really this whole panel now becomes totally dedicated to local adjustments, which is something I personally do a lot of. If you don't, then it's less interesting. But you've seen from the multifunction panel that it's so powerful you could do all kinds of stuff. And then if I press B, it switches back to my other bank, which I also made some changes with as well. So I did next collection and alternate previous collection like it is on the default map. Then again, I can turn my overlay on, toggle edit selected variants. I did copy and apply adjustments here because I figured if I was going to use this panel for doing color tagging and rating, then I might use it for copying and applying adjustments. Then we've got setting color tag, set red, set yellow, set green, select green, for example, select yellow, select red, no yellows, only one green, like so. So brilliant, absolutely love that panel. It's just once you get your head round into the possibilities, it's really nice. Is the iPad version also supported? Yes, I mean the iPad version looks exactly like all these panels, exactly the same. If we just go back to the website, there's a picture of it. So it's a virtual panel, and down there you can pick trackable, multifunction, knob, button. And it will work exactly the same way that you've seen here as well. The only thing is you miss out on that tactile. You can't feel your way around the panel. So I know I'm on the top row, second row, third. Very soon muscle memory kicks in and you know exactly where all your stuff is. And that's much harder to achieve on a purely touch interface. Could I use multifunction for color balancing? Jörg says, I would think you could. If we go to Trackable Bank, like so, where would it be? Color balance, yes. So you've got shadow tone, X and Y, midtone, lightness. The only thing is you'd have to do 2 banks, I guess. I would think, or you could make a different mode which was called color balance, and then on standard bank 1 and 2 you could have shadow, midtones, and then highlights you could have something else. I mean, it's not as nice as being able to do it on a 3 trackable, but with limitations, then yes, you could apply it as such. Are the edits instant when changing, when doing the viewing changes on screen? Well, it depends a lot on your computer. I mean, bear in mind, I'm running a webinar, recording it, and looking at pretty high-res images at the same time, and doing a broadcast, then it does actually sap a bit of the CPU power. But generally, it's really, really smooth. I mean, if you look at the slider and I rotate the dial, then it's really nice. I mean, there's a bit of lag on the display because basically you're watching a webinar as well, which is only broadcast at about 7 to 8 frames a second. So there's always going to be a little bit of lag for your viewing experience. But it's extremely fluid in my experience. That's for sure. Last little bit on the maps. You saw that we could, if we go to Manage Control Maps, you can also export maps and import maps. So if you want to share maps with friends and colleagues, you can do so. If you know we go down the road and start to create different maps, then it's very easy. It's just a basic XML text file. So if I export this map, I think I've already done it, and say export, then basically what you end up with, if I just go to the Finder, I had already exported it. You just get a little XML file like so, which is just basically text commands. So it's very easy to save and share maps as well. Excuse me. So tangent mapper, I mean, we just kind of, oh, let's close that. Just kind of scratch the surface of what's possible, but just remember, if you go into the mapper and then you scroll through what's possible, then you see there's all kinds of various different things that we could, add into this as well. I mean, we spoke about rating. You've got rotate left and right there. LCC functions, if you use that. Working with variants, like creating variants and so on. There's just really so much. If you're shooting tethered, lots of options that you can do with tethered capture as well. If we go down to the cursor tools, you can pick all the cursor tools as well. So shortcuts on buttons to pick various cursor tools, and so on. And next banks, previous banks, and so on. What I would say about let's just go to, is it panel control map settings, like so. Someone asked about sensitivities. So we've got global sensitivities, you see here, which is set to fine. And then if we went to the knob button and we went to exposure, you see if you wanted to, you can change the sensitivity here as well, or you can check it to global like so. So if you want to mess around with that as you wish, then you can do so. Oh, that's right. What we did with the alternate mapping is that we drop the ramping down a bit. So if we hold down alternate, then it gives me a finer control. So with the same rate that I'm turning it, it's actually moving slower. If I let go, then it moves much faster as such. Paul says, could you give a bit more info about mapping trackables? I'm wondering what else they could be suitable for other than the color tool. And James has answered, like overlay as we saw, so for moving, scaling the overlay, local adjustments as you saw as well. Yeah, basically anything with more than one parameter, so an XY parameter. Again, sky's the limit really. You've just got to noodle around in the mapper application to see exactly what you can do. Would this work in Photoshop? Well, you've got to ask Adobe about that. If you go to Tangent's website, then they'll give you a list of basically all the various supported products. So if you go to support, then you can select your product and see exactly what's supported. But Capture One is definitely the first raw converter that has this enormous level of support for all the panels. How are we doing for time? Pretty much almost at the end. Just check the questions. Um, I think we've done a pretty good job of answering most. So if you want to just experiment, the iPad version is a good way to start. The free version lets you work for an hour a day, and then you have to pay for it. In terms of, I did mention about purchasing this as well. If you're interested, just have a word with your Phase 1 partner, because Phase 1 partners, most of our partners have signed up to be tangent dealers. So have a word with your Phase 1 partner in your local country, and they'll be able to arrange for you. The only real setup you have to do is just download Tangent's app, run that if you want to use the mapper. You don't have to have mapper running in the background. If you don't want to, if you've made your map and you're happy with it and you have a default, then you don't have to have Tangent running. Incidentally, if you didn't notice this, I know it's a bit flary on the webcam, so I'll just tilt it away. This is a keyboard, so a Logic keyboard, which is a third-party company. We've been working with them to create a color-coded shortcut keyboard for Capture One, which is also a nice complement to this system. Again, that's something that will be available from your Phase 1 partner too. If I just try and oh, glare. Just try and hold it up a little bit. So that basically gives you a really nice visual indication of shortcuts in Capture One. And we have a specific shortcut set in Capture One for UK and US keyboards. I didn't think it would be that useful because I thought I could remember everything, but it's really good at reminding you about the shortcuts that you don't use that often. Of course, I can remember all the basic stuff, but when I want to reset my renaming counter, like, is that F13 or F14? I can't remember. So this is a good way to give you a visual nudge. So Phase 1 partner for Tangent, Phase 1 partner for Logic keyboards as well. But have a go on the iPad app if you want to see the possibilities and get to know the mapping application. A great tool. So in summary, remember, each panel has multiple banks. Each of those banks has an alternate, and then you can add further modes as well to extend that once more. And don't forget, if you add a mode, you need to make some kind of button to be able to switch back and forth between those different modes as well. But you could have your default map, then you could have your adjustment map, then you could have your tethered capture map, and so on. And you saw how easy it is to switch between the two. Oh, David said there's also an Android app as well, which I didn't realize. So have a play on Android if you're on that too. Good question from Paul. Did you say earlier that the tangent map no way alters the keyboard mapping, so you can use a combo of both? Absolutely. Doesn't make any difference. Like I have like 7, 8, and 9 for color tagging. So green, yellow, red, and I have Command 7 to select by, green, yellow, and red, for example. But regardless of that, it makes no difference in the tangent mapper. So if we go to multifunction, bank 1, we've got select red. It's just simply named. So you edit shortcuts, select color tag red. Doesn't matter anyway what I've got in my keyboard shortcuts. The only way it could influence if you're asking Tangent to make a fake key press. Then it would have to link to the shortcut. But with 460 possibilities in the Tangent map, I don't think you really have to worry too much about imitating key presses. So, okay. Before we have to go, I'm just going to kill the webcam now. So let's turn that off. I'm just going to go back to let you know about next week's webinar. So any of those of you who are new to Capture One, next webinar, 22nd of December, if you're looking for something to do, Christmas time and all of that, work is winding down, so why not learn the basics of Capture One Pro 10. So that's all going to be about getting started. So I'll just take you through the very early stages to getting some images into Capture One, doing some adjustments on them, and then getting an export out. So if you are new to Capture One or you just want to brush up on the basics, then come join me next week. As I said, you'll get a follow-up email in roughly 24 hours time that will have a link to a recording which you can watch, of course, and also a sign-up link for the next webinars as well. Okay, many thanks for your time, guys. I hope that was interesting. I hope you can see that it's a really exciting product. Um, Once you get into the possibilities of the various different panels, the main benefit that you'll get is all about saving time and removing that need to have an interface up. Because as you saw, I had tools up to so you could see what was going on, but essentially you could work in full screen in Capture One all the time without the need really to look at any tools whilst you're going through images and adjusting. So it has that great benefit. It removes that reliance on keyboard shortcuts. And of course, you saw all the possibilities that we can do with the multifunction panel for local adjustments, for example, the button panel for tethered shooting, and of course the knob panel purely for adjustments. So, okay, guys, hope to see you all again next week and have a good one. Take care.